Welcome everyone to our 9 a.m. session, the MIT Schwarzman College of Computing, Shaping the Future at MIT. We are joined by Daniel Huttenlocher, the Dean of the Schwarzman College of Computing. Welcome, Daniel, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Good morning or afternoon or evening, I suppose, since who knows where everybody is. Really excited to be having the opportunity to share with you a bit about what we're doing at MIT with the new MIT Schwarzman College of Computing. When you think about this new AI era, it's really an extension of a computing age that we've all been living in. You could debate the number of decades, but you know, the first electronic computers date back to the 1940s. The computing age probably started affecting most people's lives, at least by the 1980s. And what's interesting is that AI didn't really start that much later, about a decade later in the late 1950s. But it's taken much longer to really become relevant to our daily lives. So as MIT has been thinking about what does the future of the Institute look like, in building the Schwarzman College of Computing, we're looking at this AI age and what it means for academia broadly and beyond academia. So the mission of the college is to look at the opportunities and challenges of the computing age in light of the changes that are happening with artificial intelligence. Computing's really already transformed almost nearly everything in the lives of people in the more, at least in the more advanced economies, but increasingly everywhere in the world. And we're at this time now where AI is poised to really radically accelerate the kinds of changes that we've seen in the computing age. When you think about the kinds of automated reasoning that AI is starting to do, reasoning has really been one of the defining characteristics of what it means to be human, and machines increasingly are taking on that kind of role, are able to do that. And this calls for major changes in higher education and elsewhere. And at MIT, we're embracing that and leadership in that. So the mission of the college in trying to address these opportunities and challenges is, of course, to focus first on academia as an academic institution, but we're also thinking considerably more broadly beyond the academic realm. And there are really three aspects to the college mission. Sometimes I like to call them the three-legged stool, because all three of them are critically important, and any stool missing one of its legs is going to tip over. So, you know, if you had three pillars, maybe you could pull one of them out, but you can't pull out three legs of a stool, one of three legs of a stool. So the first is the rapid growth and evolution of computing fields, notably computer science and the rapid growth and change of artificial intelligence. But computing is really something that's been broadening quite a bit, as we'll touch on in a minute. And one of the things that's most challenging, I think, not only from the academic perspective, but also broadly, is the really rapid pace of discovery and change in these fields. And how do we really address that in academia and beyond? The second piece is that computing is changing almost every discipline. And so within the organization of an academic institution, how do you look at collaborations across multiple departments and disciplines where computing is increasingly important to that? And then the third leg of the college stool is a focus on social and ethical responsibilities of computing. This is something that we've seen as being increasingly important, particularly with recent advent of AI and decision-making tools, but it's really been there since the earliest days of computing and the ways in which computing influences people's lives so broadly. And the approach that we think is very important is that we bring together the humanistic, social science, policy, and technical expertise and perspectives on this, that just technologists alone, just humanists or social scientists alone, just policy people alone don't have the right breadth to really address the key issues. And so we're looking at how to bring together those different constituencies, and I'll touch on that more in a second. So when we think about, from the MIT perspective, the Schwarzman College of Computing, MIT is organized around the 5 schools. You can think about the college partly like a 6th school, in the sense that the schools have responsibility for and build expertise in various domains. like the sciences or engineering, et cetera. And the Schwarzman College of Computing is building expertise in computer science and AI and computing more broadly. But unlike the schools, the college has a very explicit mission to cut across all of the schools, and in fact, even beyond the schools, all of the research labs and centers at MIT, in bringing together computing expertise across all of MIT. Now, in addition, some of the units within the college themselves are interdisciplinary, but this cross-cutting mission of the college is different than just an interdisciplinary unit. It's something where we're explicitly looking to tie across the organizational structure of MIT, or frankly, across any academic institution. So first, I wanted to touch on 3 new cross-cutting areas, and then a little bit on some of the program areas in the college. So the 3 new cross-cutting areas that cut across the departments and labs and centers of the Institute are threefold. The first is something we're calling the Common Ground for Computing Education. And this is, as somebody who's thought long and hard about teaching computer science for many, many years, and more recently AI, this is something I'm very excited about. This is building multi-department collaborations to look at computing education. And let me just give you a couple of quick examples about that. So one can look at an area like computational science and engineering, which is the application of computing and numerical methods in science and engineering disciplines. And those kinds of classes and curricula often tend to get developed in individual science and engineering departments without a whole lot of coordination between them. And yet, there are parts of those classes that need to be specialized to a particular discipline, but there are parts of those classes that clearly cut across various departments. And so by creating a common place for developing these kinds of curricula and figuring out how to staff them and teach them, we bring together things that have been going on in separate departments that really benefit from working together. Another piece is, when you look at MIT over the last several years, because of the rapid growth in computing, there are a number of blended curricula that have started to be created, including blended majors, blending economics and computer science, or blending brain and cognitive sciences and computer science. And again, those have tended to be approached at MIT and elsewhere as sort of one-off pairs of some discipline with computing and with AI. This is another place where looking at these things together and not as separate, independent, blended majors is extremely important. For example, for a blended major to really be blended, it shouldn't just be 2 departments coming together. There should be aspects of that curriculum that are beyond what would be in something either department would do independently. And doing that separately in every department turns out not to work as well as thinking about that across a wide number of departments. The last piece is just the rapid pace of change in computing. If you think about introductory AI, the course material might be changing at 20 or 25% per year. And it's very hard for departments that are not right at the core of that change in AI to really think about how to incorporate that sort of material into their departments and into their curriculum without working closely in collaboration with those who are right at the center of those changes and advances. The second cross-cutting area in the college is what we call SERC, S-E-R-C, Social Ethical Responsibilities of Computing. And the aim there is, how do we, when we're thinking about the design and the development of computing systems, AI systems, really build habits of mind and action in thinking about the impacts and incorporating multiple perspectives in how those systems can and will be used, how they're likely to be used, even if that's not how they were intended to be used when they were initially developed. Another critical important part of SERC is actually developing computing technologies that are explicitly aimed at the public good. And one of the analogies I think that's useful in thinking a little bit about what SERC is about from the computing perspective. Those of you who've been in the computing field for a while can remember the days, like I can, where user experience and user interface and design issues often were considered late in the time period of designing or developing any kind of computing system or product. Whereas today, those considerations are there from the very beginning and part of the design throughout, and we've ended up with much better systems as a result of that. Similarly, we really have to be thinking about the social and ethical issues, challenges, consequences, implications from the very beginning of the design and development process. The third of these cross-cutting areas, which I won't touch on in as much detail because it's not actually implemented yet, the Common Ground and CERC are things that are currently off the ground and starting to get running at MIT. All of this is very recent. The college has only really been operational since the end of the fall semester. But the third piece is the Center for Advanced Studies on Computing, where the idea is to be a seeding ground for collaborative projects in education and research and in policy and practice that bring together some MIT faculty leader with people on the MIT campus and external participants. And in that way, like many other sort of advanced studies centers or institutes that universities tend to have, but the particular focus of the new Center for Advanced Studies when it gets off the ground will be very much based on projects. So not just bringing people together of common interests, but actually a common 6 or 12-month project that helps instantiate those interests. So the other piece I wanted to touch on is the computing programs and research that have now become part of the college, sometimes jointly with the schools at MIT. The EECS department is now joint between the School of Engineering and the College of Computing. And in making that change, one of the things that working with the EECS faculty at MIT we realized was really important was that in some sense, EECS is no longer just electrical engineering and computer science. There's a third area inside that department, which we're for the moment calling artificial intelligence and decision making, because it brings together the computer science sort of heritage of AI and the electrical engineering heritage of information systems and decision systems. And one thing that's very exciting to me about that restructuring of the department is that we're now thinking about a curriculum at the undergraduate level in AI and decision making, in artificial intelligence and decision making. And that's something that the faculty are actively working on. But at the graduate level, there are a number of computing programs in operations research, computational science and engineering, statistical and data sciences, and in data systems and society that are now all also part of the college. I always think of operations research as an interesting example, because if 10 years ago, most people would not have thought of OR as a computing discipline, whereas today, the extent of the data science and the AI and machine learning that's inherent to the practice of OR makes it really fundamentally a computing area. And then on the research side, all of the major research labs and centers at MIT that are focused on computing and AI research are now also part of the college. And what this bringing these all together does, and then bringing it together with the new cross-cutting activities that I touched on before, is it creates a single table around which the leaders of these all sit. And that's very important as we think about the coordination and the execution of the programmatic activities and the research that we're undertaking. And prior to the creation of the college, actually the president of MIT was the least common ancestor of all of these organizations. There wasn't even a single dean or the vice president for research under which these things existed. And one thing that makes this reorganization particularly important is that all of these programs are changing quite rapidly. So the little bubble diagram on the right here is just intended to indicate, not with any precision, but the extent to which, EE and CS and AI&D and statistics and data science and operations research and computational science and engineering are all overlapping, and those boundaries are moving around. And because of the rapid pace of change here, that's something that we expect to have be true for a number of years. So in part of the implementation of the college, and one of the things that it's an important aspect is not just building new cross-cutting areas and not just taking existing programs, reorganizing them, and bringing them together in a place where they can coordinate their activities. But we're also planning to grow the MIT faculty by 5%, which is a very significant change. Universities almost never undertake a large coordinated growth in their faculty. In MIT, this would date back to things like the creation of the Sloan School to think about growing the faculty in this kind of manner. And there's interesting sort of structure to this growth in faculty. Half of the new faculty are faculty being hired in computer science and artificial intelligence faculty positions. And that's dealing with this, rapid growth, both, globally and nationally and at MIT, the broadening of these fields. As I mentioned, the creation of this new AI and decision-making faculty, the significant imbalance between undergraduate interest and faculty. And in the past 2 years, we've hired 8, so about a third of those 25 new positions, 5 this year in this recruiting season that's just finishing, and 3 the previous year. But the part of this structure that's quite different from other things at MIT and many other academic institutions is that half of these 50 positions are what we call shared positions. They're shared between departments and schools around MIT and the college. And this is reflecting this leg of the college mission that I talked about at the beginning, that computing is transforming everything in academia and everything more broadly. And also conversely, that's changing computing. And so faculty members who are shared between departments and the college can really help be the locus of focus on that kind of change within the disciplines, and also how that feeds back into CS, AI, and other parts of computing. The idea of these positions is that they're firmly rooted in the disciplines, but they blend computing with another discipline. And we're just finishing a strategic planning exercise right now at MIT, where we're identifying 6 strategic areas across MIT, which involve all of the schools at the Institute. And each of those strategic areas cuts across multiple schools, 2 or 3 schools anyway. And those are where we will focus those additional 25 hires. And so I'm very excited about that process and the outcomes that will be announced before the beginning of the fall semester there. In addition to these 25 new positions, there will be additional hires of these kinds of shared positions, because various departments are interested in doing more hiring of these kinds of people than could be resourced with the growth of the faculty of the 25 new positions. So I think this is a really exciting and important way of thinking about faculty hiring, which is not planning something as big as a whole department, 25 new faculty positions, but planning it at the level of the entire institute and thinking about it in a coherent way of how does computing, cutting across MIT, what are the sort of 6 areas where we think computing is having the most impact in those areas, and those areas in turn are having the most impact in the core of computing. So watch this space, but I think this is a really important and interesting area. The last thing I wanted to touch on before seeing if there are questions from the audience is just COVID-19 response at MIT generally, and then with respect to the college. One of the things, I've only been back at MIT now since last August, having been gone for 3 decades. I got my PhD back in the end of the 1980s. And one of the things that I greatly admired about MIT as a student and from a distance, and have really been experiencing back here in the last few months, is the Institute's very hands-on responsiveness to issues, and in particular with COVID-19, really significant response from across MIT. And this is just showing a few of the projects in the Jamil Clinic around AI for advancing the development of potential new therapeutics for AI, work that we've been doing on high performance computing, work that we've done on contact tracing, and then also on low cost open source ventilators. But to me, this is really one of the amazing things about MIT is taking the deep science and really responding to the needs of society in the moment. And the college has been deeply engaged. So with that, I'll turn it over and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. I think we have a lot of really interesting questions from the audience. So I'll start with the first one. It's really great to see the college champions cross collaboration of departments. And with this collaboration, how do you balance the interests of various departments within the college?
So this is a terrific question. And, I think that one of the real challenges with any sort of cross-cutting organizational structure is there are reasons for organizations. The reasons for organizations is that each unit is pursuing, sort of locally, the things that matter to it. And so really what we're looking to do in general, and this is why I think the shared faculty hiring is a good case in point, is not trying to bring all of MIT together around each faculty hire, but rather saying, this is something important to this department. This is something important to the units in the College of Computing. And it's being overseen in some sense by the set of all of the deans at MIT. So in identifying these strategic areas, we didn't just have the college and departments go in there and sort of, duke it out and figure out who was going to win these 25 faculty positions, but rather the deans have been very involved with all of the department heads in identifying those strategic areas. So I do think that when you're looking to, bring the interests of two units together, it's very important that the leadership of the relevant academic structures is actively engaged and is working on that. And that's something that, again, I feel like at MIT, the deans work quite well together across the schools. And so that's a very important part of the leadership of that, but great question.
Yeah, definitely. I guess another general but nonetheless important question, how do we prevent unintended biasing within AI algorithms, especially given our heated political climate? And for example, with mortgage approvals, and how does the college assign this responsibility?
Absolutely. Critically important question, and something I touched upon a couple of times in talking about the mission of CERC within the college. I think there are several layers of answers here. I'm going to focus right now on the academic answers, although I do think that the answers in practice are even more important. But as an academic institution, I'll start with the academic answers. And I think that while the public attention has been called to AI recently, these issues have existed for a long time. And in fact, decision assistance in things like mortgage lending, credit approvals, those have existed with computing systems way pre-AI. This has been going on for 15 years at least, maybe 20 years. And it's incredibly important that this is being exposed broadly, but also that we recognize this is not new to AI. This is something about any type of automated system that's looking at previous human decision-making and so on and so forth and trying to automate that, because previous human decision-making incorporates all kinds of things in it, including bias and discrimination. So, but that to me is also the root of why, while at the moment I think we're facing major challenges, I also am optimistic that if we approach this the right way, we will make things better than they were before these systems existed. Which is that by making these kinds of issues more explicit and recognizing that they're there in any kind of decision system, not just AI, and bringing together a set of people who represent, the humanistic and social science types of study and policy issues, not just technology people, that we will be able to actually develop systems that are better than what we have when individual human decision making is done, because the potential for bias will be more explicit. And if it's more explicit, you can audit it and monitor it and regulate it more directly than you can when it's individual decisions. So, I think that we're in a challenging place right now. I think it's very good that there's a lot of attention on this challenging place, although I think it should be broader than on just AI, because it's actually much more broadly applicable. But I also think there is a way forward to get us to a much better place, and that's really what I view the college is focusing on, and not just in social and ethical responsibilities of computing in the college, but the college more broadly. So, terrific question. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Daniel. I know many of our alum, including myself, are really excited about the new college and have a ton of questions and wish we were all back at the Institute. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I know there were a lot of audience questions, and you can always continue the discussion on the MIT CNC Slack channel. So thank you, Daniel.
Thanks very much. Terrific to join you today.
Thank you. If you're joining us for the next session,